Welcome to week 6 of our book study on Linda Dillow's Creative Counterpart, and this week we are on chapter 6, the chapter His Greatest Fan. On page 102, she says, man's most basic needs, apart from warm sexual love, are approval and admiration. And that approval and admiration needs to come from his closest and best friends, usually his wife. The reason men often will not take the lead is due to deep-seated fears and insecurities. And those are caused by us, usually their wife, and maybe they have issues, long-term issues from when they were a child and how they were raised. But you as his wife can either add to those insecurities, or you can build him up and raise him up and help him to overcome those insecurities. It says here, God can use your admiration to build him into more of the man God wants him to be and into the husband that you want him to be. Your husband's self-image is directly connected to your private and public admiration of your husband. You know the phrase, behind every great man is a great woman. Well, why do they say that? They say that because a woman has the power to either build up or tear down her husband. There are 3 key words that apply to building up your husband. 1, accept him at face value. Don't plan on marrying him and then wanting to change him after you get married. It's not going to happen. 2, admire his good qualities. Don't focus on the bad, but look to his good qualities. And 3, submit to his authority. If you are purposely putting yourself under him, he is going to feel the weight of that responsibility, and he's going to take that lead, and he is going to want to protect you and keep you safe and all that. So how about you? How do you stack up to this? Let's start with in your private life. On page 103, Linda Dillow writes, a man can have everything outside of the home, but if the sincere respect of his wife and children is missing, he can be totally emasculated just because of what's happening in his home. This really jumped out at me. On page 104, it says, tragic things can and will happen when a wife fails to give her husband the reverence that God intended and that he desperately needs. One of the things that I struggle with as a wife is making sure that I give my husband enough respect. And this has always been the case since before I was married. In fact, when we were in premarital counseling, our pastor sat down with us and he said, Janelle, one of the things you are going to have to work on is to respect your husband, and you are going to have to make sure you do not take the lead. And because I struggle with this is something that I constantly have to remind myself that it's behind the scenes, it's in the home, that if I don't show him respect, it's just going to tear him down. And I don't want to tear him down. I want to raise him up, and I want him to be a great man. Now let's look at how we build him up in the public eye. It says in Ephesians 5 that the wife is to admire her husband and build him up. So why does a wife fail to give her husband the admiration he needs? Here are 4 things that can be a barrier to us having admiration for our husband. The first one is feelings of awkwardness. And she says how a wife can admire, it's not awkward for us to admire our girlfriend's hairdo or their house, their car, their plants, so on and so forth. But it's hard to give your husband a compliment. Maybe we're afraid it's going to embarrass him. But it's just, and I'll tell you, that is really, really hard to do sometimes, to thank him or say, honey, you did a great job. Another barrier is we're too self-centered ourselves. We're so busy looking at us that we're not paying attention to anything our husband is doing. The third thing we say is they have no admirable qualities. Well, how can that be? How can God give a man no admirable qualities? You know that he's given each of us talents and abilities, and there is something. We just have to look for them. And you remember how in the last chapter we wrote down that list of all the good things about our husband? Well, those good things are probably things that are admirable about in our husband. A German author said that if you treat a man as he is, he will stay as he is. But if you treat him as if he were what he ought to be and could be, he will become a bigger and a better man. It's sort of like setting the bar higher for him, because when you set that bar higher for him, he's going to be trying to reach it. But if you set that bar really low, well, what's there to work for? And you know, even with us, that same principle works with us. If your husband is belittling you, do you really want to work and grow and get any better? No, probably not. You're just like, well, I can't improve in his eyes, so why do I even try? That's the same principle as us and our husbands. We need to set that goal, encourage him to reach for higher heights and greater things. And when we do that, he's going to reach for those bigger things. And just like it said here, he's going to become that better man. On page 107, she says, Jesus was a master at saying people not as they were, but as they could be. Look for the good in people instead of always looking for the bad. And the last thing that can become a barrier to giving admiration to our husbands is failure to accept him for who he is. Until a wife totally accepts her husband with no condition of change, it will be very difficult for her to admire him. The negative must be removed before the positive can be planted. How do we develop this admiration? Well, first of all, men are one of a kind. Everybody is their own individual. There's no two people alike on this earth. Their personalities are different, their likes, their wants, their desires. Everything is different about everyone else. We need to admire those differences. He doesn't need to be just like you. He doesn't need to do everything the way you think he should do it, but you need to appreciate what qualities he does have. And on page 109 at the top, it says, do you really know your husband? So last week I was studying for this video, and I came to that section and I went, well, I guess I can't film this video until I do this with my husband. So I sat down with him and we went over these questions, and he's really funny like this. He's like, I don't know. What do you want me to say? So the first question, what is the happiest thing that has ever happened to your husband? And he gets this little squirky smile. It's like, I don't know. And I said, how can that be helpful to my book study? So then he gave it a little bit more thought, and he says, I married you. And I'm like, no, that can't be your happiest thing. Come on, give me the real thing. He's like, that's the real thing. So we went through all these questions, and it took us maybe 15, 20 minutes. We could have discussed this a lot longer, but that was the time we had. And pretty much my answers and what I thought were pretty much what he responded. But it was just a really good bonding time for us to have that one-on-one time, being able to discuss some of these things. And these aren't really that hard of questions, but it helps you to know your husband better. And for us, we've been married a little over 14 years. Sometimes dullness can creep into your marriage, and you forget some of those things about your spouse. And so this was a really good exercise, and I would encourage you to sit down with your husband and ask him these questions and have that heart-to-heart with him. And if you can't get away from the kids, maybe do it after bedtime. Just carve out a little bit of time to do this with your husband, because it's going to really help you understand your husband better. And one of those ways of developing admiration with your husband is, as we were just talking about those questions, but having communication with your husband. You can be two individuals in the same house and never communicate with one another. And communication is the key. And when I talked to my husband before about what is one of the most important things of having a successful marriage, both of us have agreed that the key is communication, because there's a lot of bad things that are going to happen in your marriage. You're going to go through a lot of hard times. And if you don't open up and share what's on your heart with your spouse, they're going to not know how to help you or how to understand you. And that communication is such a key to that. I cannot emphasize that enough. You need to communicate with him and talk to him and share your heart with him. Another way of developing admiration is listening to him. How many times kids are all around you, your husband comes home and he has some great news to share with you, and you are so busy, you're going, sure, can you take so-and-so potty? And yeah, I'm listening, honey. But are you really listening? And so he kind of gets this second fiddle thought, like, she's not really listening to me. And you go on your way and you say, yeah, that's great, honey. But later on, you don't have a clue to what he says. So you really need to tune in and listen to him. Sometimes you need to tell the kids, you don't interrupt right now. Mommy and daddy are talking. And that was another thing that was very hard for us to take the time to tell the kids, this is mommy and daddy's time. You always want to put your kids, make sure your kids know they're important, but at some point they need to learn respect for you guys. And they will learn so much by you teaching them, this is mommy and daddy's time to talk. If there's a truly serious emergency, you can get my attention, but this is mommy and daddy's time to just listen to each other and talk. And it doesn't have to be 20, 30 minutes. It can be just 5 minutes. Just letting your husband know that you are listening to him. He is important to you, and what he has to say is important. The next thing is sometimes husbands won't spill their guts, and you have to draw him out. And you have to do this in creative ways, asking him questions. Again, you might need to make that, maybe he only... you can't ask him questions when he comes right through the door because he gets all upset. He hasn't relaxed enough. Maybe you need to ask him after the kids go to bed and you guys are sitting on the couch together, drinking some coffee. Then you ask him some questions. How was your day, honey? Did things go well for you? And the other thing is, don't interrupt. You may think you know your husband so well that you can complete his sentences, but sometimes we are wrong. That's just... And I do this more often than I shouldn't. And I do this with other people too. Somebody will be talking to me and it's like they're not talking fast enough. So I complete their phrase so they know you don't have to keep going. But it's really rude, and it's something I've been working on, and I catch myself working on it, but it is definitely one of those things that I do more often than I should. And then forget the past. Don't keep bringing up and saying, well, honey, you failed X, Y, and Z, or you failed this time. Remember, honey, when you crashed the car because you weren't paying attention to me? Or, honey, do you remember when we got lost because you wouldn't listen to directions? No, you need to forget the past. Don't bring it up. And just, again, encourage him. And truly believe in him that he's going to do great things. And when you start doing that, great things will happen. I loved what she said on page 114 about how Sarah must have felt when Abraham decided to trade his mansion for a tent and to go find a new land and a new place where he didn't know where it was. How do you suppose Mrs. Noah felt when Noah went and said, I'm going to go build an ark in the middle of the desert? Do you think she sat there and went, honey, you're crazy. You're not supposed to do this. I'm not going to support you in this. What about Job's wife? She came up to him and says, curse God and die. We have such a huge responsibility as a wife to building up our husbands. In the chapter she wrote, what do you communicate to your husband? One wise woman put it like this: I told God about his bad points, and I told him being her husband, about his good points. So this week, let's work on building up our husbands, not tearing them down. This is something I have to work on too, because there is always that temptation that I am better, to think that I'm better than my husband. I could make better decisions and better choices over different things for our family, but God has put him over us, and he's put my husband over me, and I need to trust God that my husband will do what is right for our family. So I hope this message has been helpful to you. I know that this can be a little bit more difficult to hear because you're thinking that all of this falls on your husband, but really a lot of this falls on us as a wife. So let's build up our husbands this week. Let's have a great week with one another. And I will hopefully see you next week for our next video. Now that the holidays are over, I'm hoping to get back into our weekly schedule again and finish this book up. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it. And please share this with your friends. If you haven't joined our Facebook discussion group, you can also do that. I will put a link to that in the description below. And I will see you next week. Have a great week, everybody. Bye.